Okay. Okay, good afternoon, everyone. Thank you for joining this this session. In this session, we are just trying to make a conversation. Okay, I need. So we are just trying to make a conversation around knowledge production and the dissemination of knowledge. So my name is Elisha Oyo here. We thought about having this conversation with Dr. Admire Mare. Maybe Dr. Admire Mare, you may introduce yourself to the audience. Then we get into the nitty-gritties of what we need to really converse around this afternoon.
Thanks, Dr. Woyo. Thanks, everyone, for joining us once again on this platform, where essentially, as Dr. Woyo has said, it's a conversation around research generally in Africa. What can we do to make sure that we also become part of the knowledge production process? And I think the most important thing that drove us to get to this point is the realization that if you look at what is actually happening, most of the time, we as African researchers we are mostly downloaders of already, existing knowledge, and therefore we are not uploading any content, be it online, be it offline. And that's why even if you look at the policies that we end up having, is either it's companies or it's countries, they are mostly informed by things that actually happen in the global north. And I think the conversation that we are trying to start through this particular interactive session is to say, how can scholars from the global south or in Africa in general start to contribute to these spaces, and which spaces are important to put our research so that we can also have impact in terms of what we are doing. So that's in a nutshell, pretty much that's what is behind this process. But again, I think we are trying to make sure that this conversation becomes more or less a mentorship kind of a project where we are mentoring each other. We are not saying we, the two of us as co-organizers, know everything. Yes. We are just going to share what we have also learned along the way in terms of what can you do to make sure that you package your research or whatever you have been working on so that it can actually be be disseminated in the right kinds of platforms. And which are these right kinds of platforms? I think that is also one thing that we also want to talk about. Which are the right kinds of platforms? Do we only need to target, high impact journals, or should we also be focusing on journals that are also starting? So in many ways, that's what we will be talking about. And in terms of myself, my name is Admire Mare. Currently, I am a senior lecturer here at Namibian University of Science and Technology. Over and above that, I'm also a senior research fellow at the University of Johannesburg there. And then also I sit on several, on editorial boards of several journals here in Africa and also in the global north. So pretty much it's about sharing my own experiences, but also learning from others that also I know have different kinds of experiences in terms of dealing with these kinds of things. So thank you so much, Dr. Woyo. I think you can take over.
Okay, thank you, Dr. Mare. So that's the nature of the discussion we are likely to make. So I think for this week, we need to zero in on what is impactful research. Why is it important that we communicate scientific evidence? We look at how do we choose maybe the journal and selection process, issue of impact factors and the rat race around metrics, the need of choosing journals that are indexed in good databases, mentorship programs, and all that. So I think as a way of the way we might want to approach this is we will lead the discussion, but we would also want people to come in with their ideas so that everyone on the platform is going to benefit. So if we talk what we talk about, me and Admire, then it means everyone also has got a point on the same issue we are talking about. They are free to just raise their hands, and then we take things from there. So to start this discussion, we first need to maybe to look at the issue of research impact. What is it? Why it matters? What does it mean? How is it actually achieved? How do we measure research impact, especially given that every drop of funding that we receive as scholars now comes with strings attached. So, Dr. Mare, when you look at research impact, what does it mean to an average person or to an early career researcher when we talk about research that has impact? What are we looking at?
Thanks, Dr. Oyo, for that question. Without preempting what probably others also have to say on this particular platform, I would say that when we talk about research impact, we are talking about that research that can actually be used for various, purposes, be it at the policy level. It can also be used in terms of academic citations. So it has got multiple layers at which we can actually measure this particular research impact. But more or less, if you are a scholar, obviously it's about citation index. How many scholars are able to cite your your scholarly work? How many people have faith in what you are writing? How many people can confirm that the science that you are producing is actually, worth its salt? And I think one thing that we have also seen, even as African scholars, is that most of our works are not cited. Of course, there's the politics that is around citation that we will talk about at a later stage. But overall, one thing that you end up seeing is that it's also because we also package our information in lowly ranked journals, and as a result, it becomes difficult for certain scholars then to cite those, because there are some journals that I actually know that would say if you cite works that don't that come from certain journals, you should not use that as your reference list, and that also makes it very difficult for our work actually to be considered to be impactful. But for me, in a nutshell, I'm pretty much saying that impact is about how your research can actually be able to lead to transformative change, be it at a policy level or be it even at an academic level. For example, coming up with scholarly work that can actually be considered to be, out of this world, if we are going to use that kind of word.
Oh, okay. So in other words, we are simply agreeing to the fact that when we are saying research is impactful, we are talking about a situation where research has to make a real change in the real world. It has to inform policy. It has to bring our understanding better to the things that we are doing. So our understanding and awareness also has to change. So if we are to do impactful research, what it means is our research should be in a position to help people understand issues in a much better way than we were understanding them before. It also means that we can use research to change some kind of attitudes around people. It also means that we can use research to do some cost savings, to avoid certain costs. So in other words, it has to have impact in the real world. whether it's attitudinal awareness, economic impact, social impact, police impact, on health impact, and many other issues. So in terms of policy, your research must actually contribute to new policy. It must actually contribute maybe to the amendment of guidelines or the amendment of laws and other stuff. I'm not sure from the audience if there is anyone who would want to chip in and let us know what does research that is impactful mean to you, and what does it mean maybe to the community around you. Anyone there? Someone sent me a message.
Yeah, we have so many experienced people here. Dr. Mpofu, can you come in and tell us your views?
I think most of the points that you have spoken about are quite valid in terms of research impact and the like. In terms of in academia, citations, and also changing of educational policies or the way how we do education. If you look at education journals and what people are going to research and all those kinds of things. For instance, now you will find that after the COVID pandemic, there will be more researches on issues of online learning during times of disaster or times of pandemic, and universities and other educational institutions are going to be impacted by that kind of work in a way that they're going to take some of the recommendations or whatever may come up from those journals and implement them, and also be ready for the next pandemic if ever there's going to be something like that. So the impact of the research actually informs the future behaviors. But also at policy level, in terms of the government policies and the like, I dare say it's unfortunate that in most African government systems, there is lots of leaders who don't read. Those who live in South Africa will remember the two contrasting book cabinets of Jacob Zuma and President Thabo Mbeki. And also the fact that under Thabo Mbeki, you had intellectuals in cabinet and in government were advisors who used to write almost on a daily basis in newspapers and in. So at the end of the day, if there's vibrant research which is impactful, or when we're talking about impact, how does it change policies at different levels, be it government, be it NGO, be it private sector, be it also in opposition politics or in civic organizations. So our research has to a certain extent, reach to those people and be implemented and be implementable also in those spheres. So broadly, I think just emphasizing what my colleagues have raised, this is what I can, at this point in time, contribute.
Thank you, Dr. Mpofu, for that contribution. I think it's a brilliant contribution. So even on top of what Dr. Mpofu has said, our research should also influence or should also enriches our curriculum. We should be teaching what we are researching. I think Dr. Mari has been talking about the issues of the global north dominating what we use in teaching. It's because we are not engaged more in the production of science that can actually influence teaching. So when our research becomes impactful, it enriches our curriculum. We would use it as part of evidence-based teaching. I would also use it to solve the problems in society and many other stuff. And I would want to throw in a point here, maybe people might come in and try to answer this. How much work does it take to produce or to create research that has got impact? Dr. Mpov, I can start with you. How much work does it take for one to create research that has got impact, that can change the world, that can influence economy, that can influence behavioral change, that can enrich curriculum, that can solve the problem? From your experience, how much does it take?
I think maybe I can adulterate the question a bit and say, what does it take? That will include
Okay, yeah,
also
what
the
does
amount
it
of
take?
work. That will include the
Yes.
amount of work. So you find that as academics and researchers, the most important thing is for us to go into the field, do our work, and then come and do the write-up and then disseminate the findings. But the most important thing is to also get funding for you to go out to the field to do the kind of research that is required to do impactful work and sort of solid work. So this takes quite a long period of time, and also lots of resources in terms of funding, traveling, interviewing people, or if you're dealing with people, and also reading other works that have been done in other spaces that almost relate to what you are trying to research on. So for me, from experience, these are lots of sleepless nights, lots of funding in some instances. Dr. Mara will tell you, we did a certain project on Uber and Taxify and stuff. I at one time to go from Joburg to Durban for a meeting overnight and come back the next morning and stuff, you know. So there's lots of work that goes in there, both in terms of gathering the data, compiling the data, and also dissemination of that kind of outputs or outcomes or the recommendations. It takes a lot of work because now you have to alert certain people in certain spaces of the work that you have produced and how it can impact society, it can impact organizations, or it can impact academia. So to a larger extent, academics are known for not sleeping regular hours, and these are sleepless nights of intellectual labor that you have to put into your research.
Thank you, Dr. Mpov. There, I don't know whether Dr. Mari, you have anything. Maybe if we can move to the next issue there, where we want to just quickly zero in on how we can actually achieve this impact and how perhaps do we measure it. But the key point that Dr. Mpov is saying is coming up with research that is impactful. It takes a lot of hard work. It takes a lot of persistence, and putting it out there in quality journals, Q1, Q2, or those that are listed maybe on the Australian Business Dean Council for some of us who are in the business field. It's something that doesn't die within a day and all that. So there's a lot of hard work. There's a lot of persistence. So how do we achieve this impact? How do we achieve this impact? Dr. Mare, what do you have to say? Of course, I know there's no simple and single answer to this, but the question is of what kinds of steps can we have to achieve impact? What kind of steps can we take?
I think I just want to say one thing. I think that just to corroborate actually what Dr. Mpov was saying is that if you want to do impactful research, I've realized that you, especially in our fields, management sciences, social sciences, and unless probably if you are a computer scientist, you just have got your own lab, your own personal lab, so you can do all your experiments in your spare time, or even during the day or even during the night. for us, we need to have collaborative working groups that we have to work with so that we can just come up with something that can be considered to be impactful. If you are doing it on your own, I've seen that it's very difficult. It's very difficult to achieve impact because there are certain things that you will not be able to touch on. But as you do work through collaborative efforts with other researchers, maybe you are based here in Namibia, and then you have got people that are based in South Africa, you have people that are also based maybe in Nigeria or throughout the African continent. That way, that's the only way you can then be able to start producing what one can actually call impactful research, because then you are tapping into your different resources in terms of intellectual resources, but also tapping into different funding sources that also come with being in different spaces. So it's very important, I think, that we start thinking about, as researchers, we start thinking about how do I collaborate with somebody. Don't just focus on saying I just want to write as many publications on my own as possible. Yes, that is good in terms of academic promotion, but in terms of actually coming up with what one can actually call impactful research, you would realize that if you look at even what also happens in the global north, you will see that papers that are considered to be very good articles, usually they are written by 4 or 5 authors. But here in Africa, we tend to be almost like glory hunters. We are more interested in ticking our own boxes without helping others also to come with us as we hunt for that glory. So I just want to say that it's very important that we have collaborative working groups so that we can then be able to come up with impactful research that can not only apply in our own context, but also can also be applied even at a continental level. So research that usually happens to transform things is usually, I would say that more or less I've seen that comparative research tends to have more impact in terms of how it can actually be able to inform policy, but also even to drive social processes in a nutshell. That's what I would say.
Thank you for that. Who else do we have here on the line who can also come in? So I think from my side, I also wanted to say that there is also need for people to communicate their knowledge. I think it's quite key in terms of what they will be doing. You need to make sure that you reach the audience. So if you just publish and you let it go there, and some of the journals we publish, they are not so open and all that, I think there is need for you to make sure that some kind of your findings are communicated and you engage with the kind of audience that matters for your research. I'm not sure if there is someone else to talk about this, or we move on to the next discussion point.
I think we have so many people here. I don't know why. Maybe we have to push people to speak. We have Dr. Sadrek. We also have Dr. Mnoria Allen. We also have so many other people here that I can see. We have Caroline. We have the Denford coming through and speak your mind too.
Okay, maybe while they are gathering their thoughts together, it's important that we move forward. So I think in terms of getting impact there, this impactful research has to be communicated through conferences, through forums, through workshops, engage with policymakers, engage with educators, and all that, so that your findings will not be able to deliver any kind of change if there is really no engagement with people who matter, or if there is really no engagement with potential stakeholders from that kind of end. I leave Dr. Mare to lead us on this as we move forward.
Okay, thanks, Dr. Woyo. So I think we decided to start with this, cliche that we all know about in academia, where they say publish or perish. It's a well-known cliche that you always, tend to find whenever you enter in these spaces. People say, if you are not publishing, therefore, why are you here? Because this space where we find ourselves is about making sure that you are producing knowledge. If you are not producing knowledge, then academia certainly would not be the rightful forte for you to thrive. So it's very important why we should think about why we should publish. And it's very important, again, even if we are not even situated within academic spaces, to start just thinking about why publishing is important. I think we have pointed out, if you look at how the kinds of knowledge that we have, for example, right now we can talk about economic structural adjustment programs that we rolled out in Africa. Most of that knowledge came from the global north. There was little contribution, if any, from the global south. And that's why we ended up with those kinds of policies. Because as Africans, we are not producing our own knowledge in terms of how can we have our own policy, documents that are informed by our own context, and that is the problem that we have right now. Even if you look at the kind of political systems that we have, they are all being supposed to be democratic. And again, if you look at the major, scholars who have written around democracy, for example, they are all from the global north, and they were using their own context. And that's why sometimes when we try to transplant these democratic projects to other countries, they sometimes don't work the same way they would have worked in the areas where they actually theorized or even actualized. So it becomes very difficult. So it's very important for us, even as scholars, and even as as Africans generally, to start thinking about it critically, to say, why is it important that we add our own knowledge into the global space? Why is it important that we should upload our content? Because even if you look, right now, if we are going to do even just a small survey on YouTube, the kind of content that you are going to see there, again, you are going to see most of the talks that you are going to hear about almost any subject. Again, it comes from the global north. And again, that also creates a problem, because when we teach in class, what we end up becoming is just we become sponges that are just there to say things that have been written by other people. And therefore, it also becomes very difficult for our students to sometimes even relate with these concepts, because they are foreign to them. In their context, those concepts that you're talking about probably don't make sense. So how can we change, and how can we change that tide? We can only change that tide when we start publishing as African scholars, as we start contributing to this knowledge production process. That's the only way we can then be able to make knowledge more meaningful to our own existence. Otherwise, if we don't do that, we will continuously talk about Karl Marx, we will continuously talk about Taylor scientific management principles and all that kind of thing, which is not bad. But I think, if we are to inform policy at our own contextual level, we can only do that when we start producing knowledge that speaks to our context, but also when we start producing knowledge that can allow us to make sense of where we are, the challenges that we are facing, and are actually coming up with solutions that can actually address our own concerns. So in that regard, I would say that publishing then becomes very important, because it is only through that we can then be able to inform policy, but we can also drive, drive evidence-based, interventions. For example, right now we are dealing with COVID-19. If you look at it, most African countries actually are just waiting for the global north to come up with a vaccine. All they are doing is just, we are busy trying to just, deal with the symptoms, but we are waiting for the real thing to come from the global north. But what is really happening in terms of what is happening in our own university laboratories? What are we doing as scientists? What are we doing to also make sure that we produce knowledge that can actually shape the future that we want? How can we be able to do that? Yes, we know there are funding issues that also constrain our operations. We also know there are also political dynamics that also constrain the operations that we also face as academics. But at the end of the day, it's very important as African scholars, but also as Africans, to start thinking about how can we make sure that we publish content that can actually drive our society forward. And again, it's very important because I believe that teaching and learning cannot be done outside research. That's my own personal view of things, to say you cannot go into class and start teaching about what other people have written about. It becomes very difficult. For me, I struggle to do that. I prefer a situation where I teach based on my experience. I prefer to teach based on what I have researched. I prefer to teach based on what I know obtains in the context in which I'm teaching. rather than to teach based on what somebody in the global north has written about. Yes, we like those theoretical concepts that comes from the global north, but that should not distract us from also informing our own existence in terms of what knowledge is and what needs to be known. So it's also very important. We also publish just also to be recognized as experts, in our particular fields. It's very important. If we want to be known in our own fields as having contributed something towards our knowledge production, then obviously the only way to do that, I don't think there are many people that are known just being great teachers. Yes, they are good. There are many great teachers that are out there. Some of them who taught us when we were in grade 0, grade 1, grade whatever. But I think their names are not as high up there as people who have published. Right now, if we are talking about people that have published, there are so many people that comes to our mind. And those have been seen as experts. Very important for us just to be being recognized as experts in our own spaces. The other issue that I just want to say is to say that we also publish just to inform policies we have already pointed out. It's very important that we inform policy based on something that has been done, research that has been done. Unfortunately, because of lack of funding, most of the time we end up having consultants coming from outside of this continent to help to help us inform policy, even at a level of political parties. If you look at what happens in most political parties in Africa, most of their communication strategies or even their political strategies actually are designed by people that are not even resident in this continent. And that also raises problems because they don't know the context in which we operate, and also they sometimes misdiagnose the problem that is at the center of everything. So it's also very important that at the level of policy, we also produce knowledge so that we shape the future that we want as Africans, but we also make sure that we contribute to literature, which is the main thing at the end of the day, to say, what is it that we are bringing to the table as African scholars? So it's very important at that level. I think I will leave it there for now, and I think I'm ready to bring in others who can also contribute in terms of why is it important as scholars for us to continue to publish.
Okay, maybe as others are coming in, probably what we need to interrogate is, I see at the moment there is many researchers are actually incentivized by their institutions to prioritize publications over impact. I think especially driven by the publish or perish mantra. How do we address that?
Maybe I can come in there, Elisha.
Yeah, please do.
I'm at a university where you get incentivized for publishing. DHET will give you 120,000 for a paper that is produced, right? This is in Rand. And then the university will give you 40,000 Rand into your own pocket to use whichever way you want to use. And then of that 80,000 that remains, half of it goes to the faculty, and then maybe another 20 goes into your research account so that you can access those funds when you are researching. And this system is done in mostly Black and historically disadvantaged universities in South Africa. And you know what this means? This means that your elite publishing and researching guys are at the top 5 or top 6 universities in South Africa. Which universities have functional libraries? Which universities already have a status in terms of research? They've more than 200 NRIF rated researchers and so on and so forth. So once you incentivize, especially in those low-ranking universities, to publish, you actually encourage people to publish. And if you don't incentivize them, you're actually telling them to just only come home, teach, get the salary, and go back home. And this, to a certain extent, kills research proficiency in these mostly Black and previously disadvantaged universities. So to a certain extent, this system helps to encourage researchers to actually be active researchers in the field. I'm not going to talk about where do they publish this, because, you know, once you put money, it creates that kind of competition. But also it depends on the caliber of an intellectual and researcher that you are. If you know your worth and you know the worth of your work, you know where to put your academic outputs. But there's been lots of debates about this thing. But I think, in as much as justifiably so, the debates address the issues that people are going to produce trash work and put them in these cheap journals. But also we have to look at a situation where historically Black and historically disadvantaged universities that don't even care about publishing, as it were, they're going to die in terms of publications if you don't have those kinds of incentives. And the incentives, broadly speaking, from DHET, from the Department of Higher Education in South Africa, they are helpful in that once they give the university that money comes into a research pocket, which can be accessed by every other researcher. So at the end of the day, you're in a situation where there's funding for future research, there's funding for further research, and even funding for those who want to start up in terms of research, this specifically in spaces where you share the pot of the pot of money that comes. So that's my thoughts around this thing.
Thank you, Dr. Mpov. It's fine. I also do agree that in as much as they are doing that, they have also probably tried to have some outlets where they are saying you need to direct your research into these outlets. Perhaps it's a way of managing the chaff from it's a winnowing process, I guess. But I'm not going there today. Let me allow Danford to come in. I think he wants to further build up from the point you are making. But I think before Danford comes, the key point that I picked from this conversation is, as a researcher, you should know your worth. Please don't send your materials to fly-by-night journals. You send today, tomorrow you are accepted. Danford, you can come through.
Yeah, thank you very much. And thank you so much for those interesting views. I think the points that have been raised are very important about why we need to publish and how we should make impactful research. But there's also one other thing I would like to add about our education system in Africa. I'm not saying it's bad, but the point I want to emphasize is there's one thing that I noticed, like when I was doing my own master's, it's about how students can be empowered so that by the time they leave university, they've been empowered to carry out the research. How are we empowering our students in our universities so that the moment they leave, they are able to carry out the research? I believe in every field, it will be easy if we can come up with maybe a module that focuses on areas of research or maybe topical areas of research for that particular moment, so that students can be able to select which areas of research they are interested in. And maybe we reduce maybe so much focus on sitting exams, because I think one of the disadvantage of that is it forces us to memorize, then come to class and download what we have memorized in our minds. But then if we try to push students during class to do like maybe a sort of mini research, I think that is helpful, so that they don't just do that when it comes to their dissertation, but they are doing that as part of their learning throughout the process. And you're introducing them to key areas of research, the key scholars, and how they can make a contribution to that. Thank you very much.
Thank you, Danford, for that. I really do agree. I think at some point I was making a conversation around the questions that are actually asked in a methodology exam. And I was saying at this level, it doesn't make it right to ask a master's student whether you know the difference between qualitative research and quantitative research. And I'm totally in agreement with your views. I don't know if there are any other views that might build up from what Danford has said, or we proceed to focus on other issues and all that.
Let me just come in there and just add one or two things that I think are also very important. In terms of why we publish, the other thing that I just forgot to talk about is that university rankings are also based on, it's not based on teaching. It's not how good you are in terms of teaching, how good you are in terms of, making sure you teach your students or you come up with modules. No. It's always the research. The research component is the one that carries the day. So at the end of the day, whether we don't publish or we publish, when we see our university being ranked, whatever it is ranked, it's a result, it's a cumulative process of looking at the quality of research that is coming from that kind of university. And that is what they use then to rank universities across the globe. And I just want to also add what Danford was saying. I think it's very important that I believe, I also agree to a large extent that we have this exam orientation, a huge exam orientation that we have here in Africa. We are too focused on making sure that we examine people. But what I think is very important is to be more practical in terms of how we apply our knowledge. For example, if it's a research methodology course, as you were rightfully pointing out, you have to ask the student, you give a student a scenario and say, given the knowledge that you have of your quantitative and qualitative research, how would you go about researching this particular thing? And then if you can give somebody that kind of a scenario or a case analysis to look at, and then use that as a yardstick to measure and assess whether they have comprehended whatever you are teaching, then I think that makes sense. But unfortunately, we are too focused on exams, and as a result, we know that students always find ways of cutting corners and also making sure that they just get the qualification without actually working hard to get the qualification. So it also defeats the whole purpose. So at the end of the day, it becomes very difficult for somebody then to produce knowledge when they have cut corners to get to where they are. It becomes very difficult because this thing of knowledge production, it's a rigorous process. It's a sleepless, not only sleepless issue, but it means also that it's also an issue where it's a lonely journey in many ways, because research is a lonely exercise. I would want to say that.
Okay, those are interesting points that are coming. So I think even the pathway leading to independent scholars, it has to be shaped out differently. I think that's Danford's submission and all that. So so where do we put these? Where do we put these research that we are conducting, that we are talking about? That we are saying we also need to take our positions and be involved in the production of our own knowledge. Dr. Mare, where do we put them? Where do we publish them?
Okay, based on what is already there on the slides, I think, of course, these are the traditional spaces that we often use: your journals, your book chapters, or books. Those are the main, the go-to places to publish. But one thing that I just want to talk about in relation to journals is that when you are publishing in a journal, I would recommend that make sure that it's something that is groundbreaking or something that is very fresh. Whenever you think that you want to publish something in a journal, always make sure that it's something that is very fresh and something that is groundbreaking. Because in journals, because of the gestation period, usually you have journals that probably publish after 6 months, some publish after 1 year, some publish after 2 months or something. So they want something that is very current, something that is very topical, and something that they can actually run with as soon as possible. Whereas when you are dealing with a book chapter, that's when you can put your stale stuff, your stuff that you are struggling to put somewhere. You are saying, I don't know where to put. Then that's where you can say, okay, there's a book chapter there's a call for books that has just been launched. Can I not put that stuff there? Rather, and I've seen many people make that mistake to say, whenever they've just finished their PhD or masters, they just want to quickly, they hear of a book, call for a book chapters, and then they take their stuff from the thesis and then start publishing as a book chapter. The problem with that is that you are going to find out that the books takes a long time to produce. It can take 2 to 3 years to produce one book. So by the time that your chapter comes out, it will be stale, very stale. Very people would be interested in reading it. And that is what we have seen. So it's always very important to be tactical in terms of where to publish, what to publish, and when to publish it. Because if you are not tactical about it, you are always going to see that, and that also affects the citation again. Because if it's stale stuff, it means very few people are going to end up citing it at the end of the day. So again, it also affects your level in terms of your impact that you are going to make in your discipline. So it's very important to think about that. And then the only time that you can start thinking about writing a book is when we have made sure that you have cannibalized that thesis. You have made sure that you have, out of probably, if it's a mini thesis or it's a master's thesis, you have probably come out of 3 journal articles already. And then when you are done with 3 journal articles from your thesis, for example, that's when you can start thinking, okay, why not just then turn this thesis into a book? That's the only time that you start thinking about that, so that you don't shoot yourself in the foot. It's always important to start preempting the most fresh and very important and impactful research that is coming from your thesis. Put it in journal articles as soon as possible, so that people can engage with it and get as many citations that you want, so that you can also be recognized as an impactful researcher. After that, then think about book chapters, because book chapters, as I've already pointed out, they have got a longer gestation period. Some can even go as far as 4 years in the cycle, and you are still waiting. So it also defeats the whole process, because the whole process of publication is also very slow generally. It's a slow process generally. I think I see Dr.
Chusi, your hand is up. You are free to come in.
Yes.
Unmute. Thank you very much for the presentations. Unfortunately, I was held up and I joined a bit later during the course of the conversation. But I want to acknowledge the submission by Dr. Mare in terms of where to publish journals, book chapters, and books, and so forth. But I think what is also most critical, maybe it was covered, is that when we are really doing research, serious research, I know people do research for different purposes. Some is for tenure purposes, some is for promotional purposes, some is more applied to solve industry problems or to solve community problems. But oftentimes our research from African scholarship perspective is that we are not very mindful of the user. Who is the consumer of our research? When we run with Europe-based, journal platforms and spaces for publication, are we not isolating our own users who should be benefiting from our own research? Number 2, when we research, I know in terms of African scholarship, there's so much obsession about how many publications do you have this year versus the issue of what is the impact of your publications. That issue, it needs serious interrogation. And also is to say, after publications, then what? The what question, the then what question is never rigorously answered. What do you do? What do we do with our research? Are we able, from an African perspective, to create economic value from our research? Are we able to create economic value from our knowledge that we are creating? I want to give an example. I've seen some very prolific researchers from Africa where they are quickly interfacing with the consumers of our research output without going the whole journey of journals, book chapters, and they quickly, when you've got some cutting edge research, you quickly carefully select your audience who is supposed to benefit from this research, and you interface and interact with them. I've seen Professor Jonathan Moy doing that. I've seen Alex Magaisa doing that. They bring their research through even social media, on Facebook, through Twitter, and people begin to interrogate the research when it is still useful, when you can use it. I see people blogging. I've also seen Dr. Mare doing that, where you become a practically significant and relevant academic. So the issue of relevance, it's something that we need to really embrace and say, after publication, then what? Who is our consumer? Right now we're in the midst of a COVID pandemic. Have you ever wondered who is informing our government about some of the decisions that they've made about the COVID pandemic? Who is informing? Where are our researchers? Who is advising our government? Right now we have the issue of when are we opening borders? Where are the data-driven decisions? Do we wait for publications, or we have to engage our government about the way forward in terms of the of the key issues at stake. So this would be my contribution for now.
Thank you, Dr. Chutsi. I think you joined a bit late. The issue of impact was I think in my submission well discussed, that our research has to influence policy, it has to influence behavior, it has to lead to amendment of certain issues where we are talking about. But we do agree with your submission that we need to make our research impactful. I think it was also discussed a little earlier that even when we do these publications, it's more important to think about reaching, communicating that scientific knowledge. I think more importantly, we are looking at a situation where I see Blessing is there. She is an economist. We are talking to you and saying that you need to reduce your language of econometrics and make it applicable to the ordinary person on the street. So communication of knowledge was discussed, but you have come in and strengthened the discussion. The need to reach the audience was also discussed so that people will be able to benefit from our work as African academics. People will be able to benefit from our work as African scholars. And we also said that our findings will not be able to deliver any kind of change if no one knows about them. So I think from these platforms, it's good to publish in journals and book chapters, but it's also good to take the key findings from these journals, these books, these book chapters, and write it in an ordinary day language, so that our intended audience would know that. I think Dr. Mari was the one who said that our policymakers, they don't read. So it's our responsibility that we come up with policy briefs, we engage our people on various platforms. So I think, thank you, Dr. Chutsi, for that. And it was also mentioned, I think that's the time when you were joining in, that we also need to prepare each other well for how to do these things, especially in terms of where we might need to make a shift around moving from exam-oriented kind of stuff towards the practical orientation of things, to say, okay, if you, instead of just asking someone what is news, let us tell this person to write a news article and submit it to the Namibian, to the Herald or whoever, and probably grade it from that perspective. That was also discussed. I'm not sure if there are other issues that we need to talk here that are arising from our interactions and all that. I don't know whether Dr. Mpofu and other people are still on board. Danford, are you still around? So we move on.
Maybe before Dr. Mari, I want to quickly zoom in on the issue of capture of our academic discourse, of our academic narrative. You see, we don't have anything homegrown. If you go to our own universities, African universities, we are kind of captured. When you have got something that is so cutting edge, you want to take it elsewhere, you know? And at the end of the day, you'll go to our own universities. We are asking, do you have your own journal that is in-house? That is also really becoming a conveyor belt of our own indigenous knowledge systems, of all the sweat that we are putting through, number one. Then the issue of rankings. Where are the Southern African universities? Where are the African universities in the ranking? Where is the ranking taking place? You know, what is needed for us to be there? And who is, there's a lot of gatekeeping. At the end of the day, it would appear like we're doing nothing. But because the template of ranking universities is never friendly to us, it's also an extension of colonialism, where we are captured. If you are a bright African student, you have to be in America. You cannot be a bright African student when you are in Zimbabwe, when you are in Namibia, when you're in South Africa. So we need to correct that, unless we really take effort and say, we want to take ownership of our narratives. We want to take ownership of the communication of our research, so that it's not like in any other journal. It can be homegrown. Whether it is possible, I don't know. But I think there's need to really visit those dynamics. Yeah, that would be my remark on that.
Thank you so much, Dr. Chutsi. Let me just come in. I just wanted to come in terms of where to now go to places in terms of publication. I think we need to also to start thinking about how can we package our research in newspaper articles. How do we make sure that we also use radio platforms? You know, if you look at what actually happens at in Al Jazeera does not just Al Jazeera or BBC. They just don't invite anyone to be. You know, it's not like in Africa where everybody's an analyst. It's not like that. You know, for them, it's not like that. You just don't become an analyst because you want to use that title. But it's based on what is it that you have produced, what is it that you have done. And I think that's one thing that we also need to do even as African broadcasters, you know, newspapers, in terms of who would we then say is the go-to place, go-to person in terms of looking at, when we're looking for analysts to comment on certain issues. And I think newspaper articles can actually be good spaces for us to disseminate, you know, evidence-based knowledge that we can actually impact, you know, in our societies. But most of the time we don't do that because, again, issues of gatekeepers also come in. You know, people would say, because of your ideological orientation, obviously probably you're going to attack the government or you're going to critique the government. So they will not give you the space to publish that kind of research. And that also limits the spaces in which you can actually publish that kind of research. But I think we need to go beyond the traditional spaces. Look at blogs, as you are saying. Look at newspapers. Look at radio stations. Look at television stations. You know, come up with your own podcast in terms of how you can actually circulate this information. Even not only using English, because of course English is the default position that we use when we are publishing, but we can also use our own vernacular languages, so that at the end of the day, this knowledge must be knowledge that can actually help our societies. But right now, as you are saying, most of the publications, of course, if I publish in a global, in a journal based in the global north, obviously they're going to erect a paywall there. They're saying, if you want to read this article, pay something, which means that if my government cannot be able to pay that, even if whatever I've packaged there is important, they're not going to be able to read it. It will just be read by people that are there, and they're the ones that are going to use it for whatever, you know, purposes that they may desire. And also that also makes it very difficult. So I'll stop there for now. I think Dr. Mpofu wants to come in, I think.
I wanted to intervene on the issues of dissemination. Of course, we are right to say we have to use popular media and also newspapers and stuff, but you find that in Africa we exist in many different spaces where professors have little respect compared to prophets. You know, our people are likely to believe prophets more than professors, to an extent that for me, if I'm engaged in academic work, I'm in conversation with my peers, most of whom are disrespected in our society, but find spaces to converse in Western journals, as it were. You know, so we have to be alive to the dilemma that an African intellectual also faces. Very few of us get consulted by government departments to intervene on certain issues. I'll take, for instance, I do a lot of work on genocide, social media, and identity and the like. I tried to have a conversation with the Zimbabwean National Healing, what do they call it? You know, that arm that has to deal with past violences and stuff. Like people, yeah, I was like, okay, people are speaking on social media. Are you having conversations with these people, what they are saying and the like? Here's a paper that I've produced. Can we take the conversation further? No one responds. And we know why, you know, because in most of our government departments, we put loyalists whose interests are serving the man who is in charge or the system that is in charge, rather than serving the people. Look at Dr. Fauci in the US, for instance, the health experts in the Trump administration. He differs with President Trump in a press conference. He doesn't care, right? And this is the fear that most African leaders have of academics, that you cannot allow them to challenge and disagree with you, and then you bring them closer to you. You know, it's extremely difficult for us to operate with systems like that. So when you need academic works to be respected. Bring those academics on board to advise government, allow them to differ with you, allow them to hold different positions with you. And I think that creates for a much more healthier space and environment to an extent that it becomes easier for us to establish in-house journals, for instance. It becomes easier for us to have conversations, not only with citizens on Twitter, but not with government. So it becomes easier for us to have conversations with everyone across the board. But for me, I think I'm on the border of despondency and optimism in terms of the respect an African intellectual gets from the public and also from the public officials, as it were.
Okay. I think those are interesting views. I would tell you I was working on something where we were trying to develop some curricula that had the word intelligence. And you'll be shocked that one of the stakeholders that we were directed to ask was to go and ask the state intelligence whether this doesn't interfere with their thinking. But we were just looking at robots and artificial intelligence. It's out of context. Okay, so let's see. I don't know. Do we still need to go on? I think we've been here for an hour. Dr. Mary, do you think we still need to go on, or we might end here, maybe continue to have these discussions as academics and then try to see how far we can go? Otherwise, I think being here for a longer time, we might end up being on our own. What do you think?
Maybe one more slide or so, and then we can then find ways to move forward.
This one or the other one?
Yeah, towards the end, I think the how part, I think this one we can always. Yeah, I think you can speak to these issues, and then we can just look at this, and then we can always come back.
Yeah, you may start.
Okay, so I think the most important thing I think that we just want to lay the foundation on is to say that, so how then do you publish? Of course, we've been talking about so many other issues, and I think one thing that is very important, I think that comes to mind, is that we need to start responding to call for papers. And I think there are many ways of doing that. There are some that are targeted, that comes to us via our colleagues, but some that also come within our own WhatsApp groups as a result of probably being in a certain space. That's also how probably we can also be able to start looking at this. But also there are also targeted calls where probably somebody knows that you are into certain kinds of research, and then they'll probably just send you that call to say, okay, there's something that is brewing. Are you interested in joining? You can also do that. But there is another thing that I have seen that most African scholars usually struggle with, is that they assume that somebody is going to come to them and tell them, come and publish here. That is one thing that I've learned. People don't know that there are journals that are waiting for traditional, a conventional submission to be made on their system. And that is one thing that we need to start looking at critically and say, okay, if this journal is credible enough, how can I not just go on their platform and start thinking about uploading whatever manuscript that I have, and then wait until the peer review system has been done, and then I can then be able to do that. Because people struggle with that, and I've seen so many people having so many manuscripts that they are building up. They are building up an archive of manuscripts that they don't know where to take these manuscripts to. So I think one thing which is very important to look at. The websites of some of the journals that that are credible in your field. But also the other issue is also to respond to book chapter calls, especially now in the COVID era. We have seen so many book chapter calls that have been sent our way. So it's another way also of also getting into the publishing business. But also the other way is also to just start your own book proposal and say, no, I think I've written a lot around this area. I think now I have enough experience to write about this particular area. And then you just go online and then look at how can I come up with my own book proposal. And then you start working on it. So there are many, of course, here we're talking about Palgrave, Routledge, Sage, but there are so many other even African publishers that are also credible that you can also work with in terms of coming up with a book project. And it's very important that we do that, because as I was saying, most of our thesis, whether masters and PhD, they're already book material. It's only that we don't have time probably just to think through it and say, how can I transform this into a book thing? So it's very important for us also not to make that mistake to say, you have a master's thesis that you are sitting on, and you know that it has got very rich information that can actually make a difference in society. And then why not just start thinking about how can I then transform this thing into a book proposal, and then you start working on it. And nowadays it's very easy to do that. You can just come up with a book that has got 5-6 chapters. It's not about having 20 chapters in that book. It's about just what is manageable to you, as long as you can explain to the reviewers how you are going to make sure that your chapters can speak to each other. If you're saying, I want only 6 chapters, and then you tell them the themes of those chapters and why those chapters are important in terms of addressing that particular subject that you're dealing with, and then you pitch it. And I can tell you, especially with these European publishers, you can make money out of it. People usually say academia doesn't pay, that kind of thing. But one thing that I've seen is that there are royalties that can come out of selling these books, and you can make a lot of money out of it as long as you can package it well. But sometimes we often run to some of these fly-by-night publishers like Lampet, that kind of thing, and before you know it, your work has already been copyrighted, and you can't go back to them and claim back that information that you've already given them, because it's now their private property. So I think we also need to be very tactful in terms of where we send these things, but also we also need to make sure that we are very careful of actually having our ideas being taken over by people, because I know there are so many people that are actually abusing these platforms. And actually, they'll say, okay, send us the whole manuscript. And before you know it, it's already been published somewhere else. So we also need to know the right channels through which, otherwise we can easily be abused in this process. The process is also it has got so many other, unwritten rules that can also be abused by people. But also there are so many gatekeepers in the process too, as Dr. Chiwusi was saying. But be that as it may, we need to get into that space of publishing and take advantage of all our platforms that we can have, whether it is a call for book proposal, or is it a call for papers in terms of journal articles. So that's what I would say for now, and I think I can open it to others as we round up.
Thank you, Dr. Mari. Maybe as we also round off this discussion, maybe I will direct this one to Dr. Chiwusi as we are trying to shape the academic narrative. Someone in the chat box is asking, how do I remain relevant in terms of IT research, where Africa itself is so far behind in terms of technology? Dr. Chiwusi, if you might come in and share probably and try to help this scholar online. How do we remain relevant when things that we are researching about, we are even behind globally?
That's a very relevant question, really, in terms of how do we also continue to occupy the space. We are now living in a marketplace of ideas. The walls have collapsed. The traditional walls, the physical boundaries have collapsed. And there's so much opportunity to network, to collaborate, and to access data with a lot of open access platforms. So the idea is, if you want to remain relevant, then you also need to be current. What kind of spaces are you using? Which kind of research are you doing? And who is it helping? Gone are the days of just doing research for fun or research for interest's sake. It must solve real societal problems. They must be relevant. They must be cutting edge. It's not just a matter of ticking the boxes. It's not just a matter of also going solo. We have a lot of people who believe in soloism, but the challenges of technology that we have, they need us to really have synergistic approaches where we collaborate. Check who is who in your field, who is doing what, and approach them and network with them. So there's an opportunity to network and to pitch our conversations and our narratives at the level where we can say, people cannot afford to ignore you. If you are relevant, you cannot be ignored. If you are on point, you can't be ignored. So this is quite important to be able to open up, remove the silos, network with others. I know technologically we're behind, but we can always make our mark through collaboration. The North-South kind of collaborations, the South-North kind of collaborations. Who is who in your field? Who you can be able to network with in the field that you want to work on? That's what I would probably suggest at this stage.
All right. I think it has been an interesting discussion that we were having. And
I wanted to add something there.
Oh, okay, you can go ahead, Dr. Mbof.
In terms of publishing and collaborations, Dr. Mare touched on it a bit. If you look at your so-called big scholars in the global north, and even here in the global south, this is happening. They come up with an idea. They're in the same field. They contact each other, guys. Let's do a book project. All you see is a book project coming out, but you never know when the call for papers was done. You know, and for emerging scholars also, it's quite easy to do this. I know Pedro, for instance, insists that in each volume of a book edited collection, there must be PhD holders already. You have more than 20 PhD holders in Southern Africa, for instance, in your own field currently. Emerging scholars, one not even your top whatever scholars. And we can do these kinds of work together. And also, if you realize that there's someone in the global north who is doing this similar kind of work with you, you can ask for a collaboration, right? You can gather the data here and then you say, okay, can we work together on this and this? And then you become the lead author. And then there's something, I don't know where this comes from, but it's mostly in your Black universities, where your supervisor, even if they don't contribute anything to your publication, their name has to be there. That tends to undermine to a certain extent your independence, your strengths, and also your stature as a scholar. You find that someone is like 5 papers from their PhD with their supervisor, but the supervisor never contributed anything. Just because he supervised me, therefore he has to be. You know, so you need to publish with your supervisor. I'm not saying you don't have to, but at the same time, there are certain things that you independently do that need to stand up on their own. And maybe in future we need to speak about Dr. Marendoy about the issues of rejection. How do you deal with rejection? How do you deal with submission? Because most of us fear being rejected. You know, you won't submit anything because you're afraid of being rejected. So we need to deal with that phobia of rejection until, you know, let's have rejection normalized in academia. let's be easy. Let's embrace rejection. Let's embrace it, right? But as time goes on, you gain strength through that. But so the issues of collaborations as emerging scholars is quite important. Let's call on each other, engage with each other. And also there's an issue of being backward in terms of IT and all these kinds of things. Those of us who have been in Europe, for instance, you notice that you can use one ticket to jump into a bus and jump into a train until you get to a destination within a certain period of time. And that system has been implemented. Why I'm saying this is because my wife is working as a traffic planner in South Africa. They're trying to do the same thing, you know. So in terms of IT, you might find that there's some things that are already being done that side that are not being done this side. So you can even implement or come up with certain projects that are actually relevant, that are being done that side and can be relevant and impactful, even implemented in the global south, as it were. So in terms of research, we're not saying that you have to do something entirely unique that doesn't borrow from other contexts. We can borrow from other contexts, right? And also make our works relevant and impactful to our needs in Africa, our needs in South Africa, our needs in Zimbabwe, in Zambia, in Rwanda, you know, because each country has specific needs for certain technologies for their own people.
All right. So I tell you, this discussion will not end, but I think we need to end for today. For today, not like we have actually closed these discussions. I think maybe every other 2 weeks, we if you are interested, we would need to meet every other 2 weeks to discuss issues. I think there are some issues that have already been tabled. We need to do this. There's an issue of coming up with a journal that has been raised. It is this platform that way we can create our own African journal that pushes the African narrative. Of course, we are not going to publish junk in that journal. We are going to publish only quality research, but we have to start from somewhere. And maybe we can also take this platform, Dr. Mare, to announce our oncoming virtual conference in October on the future of higher education in Africa. You are free to receive the call from us. And at the end, we are thinking about editing a book on those kind of discussions that we are going to have. So maybe every other 2 weeks, we are likely to meet. If you are interested, then we discuss issues. I like the idea of building an African narrative. I like the idea of decolonization, but it has to take place with people meeting together, discussing some ideas, pushing the agenda forward. Just complaining in our own small circles will not take us anywhere in the world. Dr. Mare, maybe if you can wrap up this, then we say goodbye to everyone.
Okay, thanks, Dr. Oyo. I think the other issue that is just coming up, I think we were meant to discuss about it. I think the mentorship program, I think one thing that we also want to do as part of this conversation is to make sure that we pay each other up as, as mentors, mentee, and all that kind of thing. So that at the end of the day, when we are done with this conversation, I think we must be able to leave each other, having moved to a notch higher in terms of where we are in terms of our publication, trajectory. So it's very important that we want to make this space also to become a mentorship kind of a program, but we also want to make sure that we also bring in as many PhD and master's graduates into this platform, so that, as we were already talking about, it's very easy for us if the more we are, the easier. We can easily come up with a book, because already right now I'm seeing 13, 14 people already here. So it becomes very easy for people to just say, you write a chapter, and then let's engage with Routledge. And before you know it, by next year, we already have a book that is already, somewhere. So you start from somewhere, but these are the conversations that we want to talk about, to say, how can we use these platforms to help each other? And I think going forward, the other thing that we are also thinking about beyond the mentorship is to also go into the nuts and bolts to say, if somebody says write an abstract, for example, what is expected? What is expected essentially? When somebody says you submit a journal article, what are the key things that you should not be missed out whenever you are writing a journal article? If you are saying you're writing a book chapter, what are the key fundamental issues that should be part of that process? So I think this conversation is going to touch on so many things related to publication, but also even more other things related even to popular communication of our researchers. We were talking about issues around how do you write a newspaper article, for example. If you have got a research that you've done, you want a certain constituency to be able to know what is the findings that you've come up with. We can also use this platform to help each other, because we know they are experienced journalists here, some are experienced academics, some are experienced policymakers, even how to write a policy brief, for example. Because what I know is that most policymakers deal with policy briefs. They don't want to read this long research that we publish. They just want to read five. If you can package it in 1 page or 2 pages, that's what they want to read, and that's what they use to make decisions. So how can we help each other to come up with policy briefs that can then inform our government policy? So I think this is the platform that we can actually use to do that. We are starting it now, but I think as we go on with this, I think we essentially is going to have its own life and also its own identity as a conversation, but it is going to help us to become better, better academics, but also better Africans at the end of the day. So I think with that, I leave it there. I don't know unless there are other issues from the public in terms of where do we go from here. if there are people who want us to, we've got issues that they want us to discuss, so that we can take note of them now, and then we start preparing for the next conversation.
I think for now, Dr. Mari, let's end this session. Thank you everyone for joining. We wish to see you again for further discussion in 2 weeks. Keep well, stay safe, keep social distancing, put on your mask, and follow the regulations prescribed in your countries. Have a good week until we meet again. Bye.
Bye, everybody. Thank you so much.
Bye-bye.
Yeah, maybe Dr. Chusi and Dr. Mare, you may stay behind. So, okay, go ahead.
I was saying this is quite insightful. Just that I missed. I had an exam that I was administering online, and it really took the other half of the conversation. But really, big issues being raised, and it's really good if we can only keep the momentum. We will be by the end of the year, we would have really reached that real milestones.
Yeah, I think so. We've started well. I don't know, what do you think, Dr. Mari? I think we started well, and it would be nice. In my thinking, I think since we run another weekly seminar, this one we can run it every 2 weeks. Otherwise,
Yeah,
it will weigh on us and all that.
Yeah, that's very true. I think weekly conversations like this, I think it's fine. But as we are saying, I think the going forward, I think we can just probably start thinking about just say, for example, let's say we can bring somebody who is probably not part of our group, who is probably experienced in one or two things. They just come and give their talk on something. Let's say it's abstract writing. They say something, and then the group then start discussing about it and see how to improve and all that kind of thing. That would really work at the end of the day.
Yeah,
so that it doesn't become just a conversation between us and a few people.
Yeah. So what I would suggest is, if any one of you have got people who are good at that, you can just contact them. Then we organize for them to come and speak to us and speak to a wider audience. And I think it's also important. I think my platform here can take up to 100 participants. So if we can share it widely, it will be good. Because if we don't get into that space, then what it means is we will continue to use things that perhaps we don't want, or things that perhaps doesn't speak to our circumstances and all that.
Yeah. That's the way to go. Let's keep our eyes on the ball. Let's keep the interactions and the networking. We'll definitely get somewhere.
All right. So I think it's bye-bye for now. I've been in the meeting since 9 o'clock until 4 o'clock, because the other one ended at 2:30 and we started this at 3.
Yeah.
Thanks so much.
You're working. You're working, Prof. You're working.
All right. See you.
Okay, thanks, eh?